Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here so bright and early. This is probably one of the earliest speeches I give every year, so it's no doubt another sign of how hard-working and dedicated the third sector is that you all get up so early. I have to say the aroma of bacon rolls in this room right now is making me feel quite hungry, so I hope you've all enjoyed your breakfast. It's always a real pleasure to speak at the gathering and to have the opportunity to visit some of the exhibits, as I will do later on. I think every year as I go around and see the stalls and exhibitions, you get a real flavour of just how much people right across Scotland really benefit from the compassion, the expertise and the dedication of the third sector. You'll also get a good idea of that from my fellow panellists. This morning, the work of Amy and Alzheimer Scotland to help people with dementia to live as well as possible, the way in which David and Street Soccer are helping to turn around the lives of people who are homeless, and the efforts of Colin and Stonewall Scotland to promote equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people. So it's that diversity that's represented here at the gathering each and every year that makes it important, I think, for me, is the very first thing I want to say to you this morning is a simple thank you for the work that you do. Whether you are helping refugees settle in Scotland or providing care and support to some of the most vulnerable people in our country, whether you're involved in work to protect the environment or influence public policy, or much, much more besides, the work that you do, the work that the sector does collectively is absolutely vital to the prosperity and the well-being of every single community up and down the length and breadth of the country. So thank you for that. There's no doubt at all that the third sector has become and will continue to be a really important partner of the Scottish Government in developing and delivering so many of our key policies. And the third sector is also heavily involved in public service reform, particularly around the integration of health and social care. In fact, social care amounts to over a quarter of the third sector's turnover, and I've just been talking to Martin Syme before coming in here this morning about the important contribution, and I think the increasing contribution in the years ahead that the third sector has to make to how we deliver social care in a society where because of the changing demographics of our country, the demand for social care is going to be increasing. We've also seen another really good example of partnership in action in recent years in the area of employability. Since 2010, the third sector, led by SCVO, has delivered our Community Jobs Scotland programme. Over the past 6 years, that programme has created job training opportunities for more than 7,500 people. So I'm delighted to be able to confirm this morning that subject to parliamentary approval of our budget tomorrow, which I hope will happen, we intend to continue to fund the Community Jobs Scotland programme next year. We will allocate a further £6 million that will support a further 700 job training opportunities. And these will again focus on young people who are most in need of help into employment. As with last year's programme, we will continue to target support at young people who are carers or who have experience of care, young people who have disabilities or young people who have past criminal convictions. Because enabling young people in these groups to make a contribution to our economy and our society is good for them as individuals, obviously, and we have a duty to support them. But it's also good for all of us as a country. The more that we can encourage and enable people to fulfil their potential, the better it is for all of us, because it helps us to build a stronger society and a more prosperous economy. Now, links between the third sector and governments sometimes receive criticism. We've seen some evidence of that in Scotland in recent times. But I really hope that these examples of good partnership working in action help to demonstrate why, certainly from the Scottish Government's perspective, support for the third sector is an investment, and it's a very good value investment in the prosperity and the social cohesion of our communities. Our partnership with you, and I want to stress this point, is something we want to build on, not in any way draw back from. That's why I want to look just briefly at two areas where the third sector will play an increasingly important role in the years to come. And these are in addition to social care, which I've already mentioned. I'll talk about social security in a moment, but I want to start with something which isn't so much a specific policy as an overall approach to government. It's about the importance of human rights in public policy. As a government, we aim to ensure that people are free from fear and discrimination. We also want to tackle the social and economic disadvantage which harms people's health and well-being and which so often reduces their educational opportunities. And many of you are partners with us in that work. And of course, all of that effort is guided by our commitment to human rights. Dignity and equality are human rights principles, and so are empowerment and partnership. And that's why we are determined to continue to put human rights at the heart of policy making. For example, human rights, together with the Sustainable Development Goals, will be fully reflected in our revised national performance framework. And I know the third sector has been a strong supporter of this work. In fact, the campaign the SCVO ran last year, The Right Approach, showed how thinking about human rights can help organisations to improve the services that they deliver. For example, it demonstrated the importance of giving service users a say in how services are delivered, and it also showed how human rights can be used to hold government to account for the services we deliver. And I think that was a good demonstration of the practical benefits to individuals and organisations of thinking about human rights, because these benefits are very often missed out in media coverage or the general narrative about human rights, but they do make a real, meaningful, tangible difference to people's lives. And one reason I'm stressing that point today is that, I know that many of the political developments of the last year or so have been very unwelcome and very concerning to many of us. In particular, I'm thinking of some of the language being used right now about immigration, both before and since the EU referendum, which is genuinely unsettling and disturbing for many people. Equally, some of the language and attitudes about immigration and other matters like gender equality that we're hearing from certain other countries right now contribute to that sense of unease. We've had some unwelcome reminders in recent times that progress on human rights issues isn't always inevitable. We can't always take it for granted. It's something that we have to argue for and campaign for at every opportunity. So for the Scottish Government, I want to be very clear that our intention is to continue working with you to strengthen rather than weaken human rights protection, and to continue to make sure we embed and mainstream that human rights thinking in everything we do. And one example of that is the way that we intend to manage our new responsibilities for social security. By the end of this session of Parliament, the Scottish Government will have responsibility for 11 different social security benefits, which currently affect round about 1.4 million people in Scotland. We aim to improve on the current system, which we think is woefully deficient in many respects. In fact, we've already announced some important measures that we intend to introduce, such as increasing the carers allowance and the abolition of the bedroom tax. And of course, we also, on a basic administrative level, have to ensure that everybody gets the money they're due on the day it is due from the very beginning. So getting the system right is one of the most important responsibilities we have. Later today in Parliament, the Government will publish our response to the recent consultation on social security, and I know many people in this room will have contributed to that consultation, and we're grateful to you for that. I won't preempt the response that we'll publish later on, but one point to stress is the widespread endorsement there was for the guiding principle that the new system must ensure that every individual who relies on it is treated with dignity and respect. Now, sometimes I say that and I think, well, every social security system anywhere in the world should be founded on those principles. But as we've too often seen in the UK in recent times, that is far from the reality. So it's really important that as we proceed, we embed those principles in everything we do. We'll also confirmed today that we will work very closely with service users and other partners as we prepare the legislation and design and deliver the new system. In fact, we'll shortly announce plans to work with at least 2,000 individuals across the country who have lived experience of the current system. And the third sector will be a hugely important part of that process, because many of you deal on a day-to-day basis with the consequences of social security and welfare changes. And your views won't necessarily always be comfortable for government. There will undoubtedly be times when you identify problems with what we're proposing, or identify areas where you think we should be going further and faster. But actually, it's when we are in danger of getting things wrong that I think your views matter most and are often most valuable to us. So we welcome and value the role of the third sector. You're already playing a major part in helping us to establish a social security system that respects everybody's dignity and values everyone's potential. So I hope, relatively briefly this morning, I've given you a good sense of the importance that we attach as government to our partnership with the sector. We live in challenging times, there's no getting away from that, financially challenging times and times that are challenging in other ways, and I don't underestimate that. I know some of the messages from the gathering already running in the media this morning about the stability of funding for the sector are hugely important, and we want to work with you as the sector in getting that right. Above all else, we welcome not just what you do day in day in communities across the country, but we welcome hugely your role as a critical friend in policy making. And of course, we value the services, the very varied and diverse services you provide right across the country. So as we address new policy challenges and a range of other challenges in the months and years ahead, we want to strengthen the partnership we have. By working together, we can make a huge contribution towards our shared goals of building a fairer and better country. So for all these reasons, it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm really looking forward to hearing from my fellow panellists, answering your questions and getting into some discussions about the many issues that I know will be occupying your minds over the course of the gathering. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, First Minister. My name's John Downey, Director of Public Affairs at SCVO, and I'm going to be chairing this next part. As the First Minister said, we're going to open up to a bit of question and debate, and it's always a unique opportunity to have the First Minister here and, take your questions and answer them. But first of all, First Minister's been joined by Colin Macfarlane, who's Director of Stonewall Scotland, Amy Dalrymple, who's Head of Policy at Alzheimer Scotland, and David Duke, who's the Chief Exec of Street Soccer Scotland. What we're going to do is hear from David, Amy and Colin just on some of their key issues, a minute each, and then we're going to open it up and have about 45 minutes or so for questions. So, David, I'll maybe start with you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? My mic on? When you say issues, I think issues is a kind of bad word for me. I work in an environment where we work with people who are going through difficult times, So we always try and put a positive outlook in everything. So my kind of view of today in charity and social enterprise in the third sector is one of positivity, because for the last maybe 6 months I've been spending a lot of time meeting organisations working in homelessness and volunteering and social enterprise. And I'm just inspired by the goals of everyone and how people just want to achieve. And I think for me to make a difference here in Scotland, it's all about collaboration. I think we all talk about it, but I don't think we do it enough. I think it has to be, everything we do is all about the people we're here to serve. So for me, it's people coming through homelessness and mental health and addiction. In order to serve them the best way, I need to collaborate, because we know that there's insecurities around funding, etc. But actually, if we all work together, then we actually might save money, and actually might be able to create a better way of working. I also feel that we don't engage with private business as much as we should. I think private companies in the private sector, there's real assets there. And I don't just mean we'll get a lawyer to sit on the board or we'll get an accountant to sit on the board. Get them on the ground. There's skill sets there, but we're no access, and they want to help. I mean, I've been involved in social enterprise for about 7.5 years now. And if it wasn't for the support of some of the companies that we've worked with over the years, we wouldn't be where we are today. So there's a lot of skill sets here. So I'm actually very positive going forward, but I think it's key that we collaborate, we use the assets that's there, and also co-production, you know, get the people who are there to serve, get them involved in how we deliver services, how we design services, because at the end of the day, these guys and lassies know best.
Thank you. Amy?
Absolutely. Well, I was going to cover some of the challenges that seem really big, like social care, and then move on to talk about human rights and then some of the political shocks that have happened, but that's already been covered by somebody else. It really is that obviously working in the field with dementia, this integration of health and social care and the partnership that the third sector can have in improving the lives of people with dementia and others who use those services is hugely important. So I'm really glad to hear the First Minister put that, you know, kind of like top of what she's saying today. And starting from that human rights approach and belief in people individually and collectively as well is hugely important. It's a really powerful starting point. And I think echoes some of what David was just saying there as well about using the assets that people and that communities have already got. So it's not just about these statutory services that are being provided. It's about joining them up to people, to the resources, the family resources, the community resources, that people's work, people's houses, people's connections with their friends, the activities that they do, and making all that work together. That's a massive, massive challenge for us. But it's one that in the third sector here, the people in this room, the people who are coming today, the hundreds and hundreds of people who are coming to the gathering today, we really are in a really privileged position to be able to take forward and to be able to bring government and its agencies, including local government, together with people who are there, have lives, and make those connections, because it's not just about accessing formal services, it's not just about, it's also not just about, you know, people getting on with it themselves. It's about a coming together. That's what we understand in this room, and that's what I think, yeah, we can be positive about, absolutely.
Thanks, Amy. Colin?
I'll cover it from a sort of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender perspective, but I'll also reflect on some of the stuff that David, the First Minister, and Amy has just said. So at Stonewall Scotland, we kind of work towards 4 pillars. So that's transforming institutions, that's empowering individuals, that's changing hearts and minds, and that's changing laws. And we have seen over the last 30 or so years a rapid change in how LGBT people are perceived in society in a positive way. You know, when I was born in 1976, but it was still illegal to be gay in Scotland up until 1981. So in my lifetime, people were still being charged and potentially going to prison simply because of who they loved. So we have seen a shift, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to do. The First Minister is absolutely right. Just because those rights have been hard won for gender equality, for LGBT equality, around race and disability equality, that does not mean that those rights are cemented and that they are always safe. You know, equality is always really tenuously held. And what that means is extra work, that's not being complacent, that's about ensuring we keep our eye on the ball. And I'm really pleased today to hear the First Minister say that the human rights agenda is going to be central to what government does, because this is about human rights. And we have seen the values of human rights under real attack, not only, you know, if we look at the political shocks that have happened over the last few months, but also in some of our media. And we've seen that for a very long time, this erosion of what human rights actually mean. Human rights basically mean about being able to get up in the day and go and do what you need to do and live your life completely as you want to live it. It's as simple as that. It's about having the same opportunities and the same chance to flourish and to do what you want to do in your life. It is not some huge construct that's dangerous or is going to destabilize society. It makes us stronger. And where we're at now to make sure that those rights are held is to work as a collective. We cannot be in isolation, either as a sector or as individuals. Because it's not good enough just to say, well, I care about LGBT rights, but I don't really give a stuff about disability rights. Or I care about disability rights, but, you know, gender rights, yeah, all right, fine. We have to look at this as a collective, and as organizations and as individuals, we need to work together to ensure that those rights are held, maintained, and are strengthened. And that's a job for each and every one of us in this room today, tomorrow, the next month, the next few years. We've got a fight in our hands, I think, to make sure that those values are embedded in the work that we do so that everybody can flourish and be who they are, and people all over, wherever they are, can be accepted without exception.
Thank you, Colin. Colleagues, we're going to open it up for questions. We're going to take them in blocks of 3. So usual format, we've got a couple of roving mics. If you want to say your name and organisation, and then I'll kind of allocate the questions between the First Minister and the rest of the panel. So who'd like to be first? Gentlemen, a couple of gentlemen in the corner over here.
Hi everybody, Ian McGill for Harmony Employment. More towards the First Minister. You saw this research today, the third sector's feeling pretty down, huckled down into survival mode. We see you're not afraid to use the tax powers we have already. We saw a U-turn on tax just yesterday. We know you're not afraid to take tough decisions. You've 152,000 college places cut is a tough decision. The children's ward in Paisley is a tough decision. I'm afraid that you're making a tougher decision pushing for an independent Scotland in the European Union commits us to getting our deficit down to 3% from more than 9%, and we lose the fiscal transfers coming from the rest of the UK pooling and sharing. How can we have confidence that you have a plan there to reduce the deficit to meet the EU requirement there deficit-wise?
We'll come back to that.
Thank you. My one's a lot less technical than that. John Frary from a company called All Cleaned Up. We specialise in employability of ex-offenders. And I was just wondering, the First Minister mentioned ex-offenders, I think, in a speech, and I was wondering if the government have any plans or any desire to encourage greater, if you like, risk-taking in the public and the private sector to take on people who are ex-offenders or have got a history of drug abuse or other mental health issues. And it shouldn't necessarily be left to social enterprise to do it. I was wondering if there's any plans to put that in place. Thank you.
We'll take a final question from the gentleman in the middle there. His hand up. Craig. Yep.
Yeah, Alan Staff, Apex Scotland. First Minister, grateful for your recognition of the tensions that are caused by the sort of slightly hand-to-mouth existence of the majority of the third sector. My question really is less about what can be done about the funding situation, more about do you recognise the waste that type of approach to the third sector creates? Both financially and in terms of human and commercial and community resource. And is there any thoughts of putting a strategy together that actually engages the third sector in a more efficient and economically sensible way, rather than spending huge amounts chasing money? A vast amount of our infrastructure is spent simply holding the organisation together rather than delivering the care that we are actually in there to do.
First Minister, I'll let you respond to some of them, and I'll maybe bring David in the employability issue.
Well, firstly, in terms of Ian's question, I mean, we come from very different political perspectives, Ian, so I think we probably just have to respect the differences between us. Just on a couple of points of fact in your question, we're in the EU right now. In my view, the real outrage in Scotland is that we face being taken out of it against our democratically expressed will. I think that is something that should be of enormous concern to many people from a democratic point of view, as well as the issues around the EU. The deficit, 3% deficit thing, of course, is not a requirement of EU membership. It's a requirement of the euro, and no country can be compelled to use the euro, and it's not something I would advocate for Scotland. Scotland has a deficit right now. The UK has a massive deficit right now. Most countries across the developed world have deficits. The question for any country is, how do you most sustainably address a deficit in a way that protects essential services, grows your economy sustainably, and does it that way, as opposed to the kind of slash and burn approach we've seen from successive UK governments over the last number of years, which has put the burden of reducing the deficit often onto the shoulders of the most vulnerable and those who can least afford it. What we know as we look ahead right now is that change is afoot. The decision to take us out of the European Union is going to cause damage to our economy, as well as many other areas of our life. We're already seeing in our health service and our universities some of the early impacts as it becomes harder to recruit people from other European countries into some very important areas, and I think we'll continue to see a real squeeze from that. So there's going to be real damage done to Scotland as part of that. So the question is, as we look ahead to challenging times, how do we best equip ourselves in Scotland to face up to and deal with those challenges in a way that is consistent with our values as a country? Now, we'll have debates over the next few years in terms of how that is best done, but I believe very strongly that you don't magic away challenges just by pretending they don't exist. But if you take control of how you face up to them, embed your own values in how you face up to them, that is undoubtedly better than allowing those challenges to be addressed by others who often don't share your values and who take approaches to that are very, very damaging to the very people all of us in this room are determined to protect. So, that's my view of how we perhaps face up to these challenges in the future. But anybody who says that by not considering the option of being an independent country, we just magic away those challenges is not being honest with people. If anything, they're going to be even greater. In terms of the second question about risk-taking, I think it's a really good question, and there's a really important issue at the heart of it. In short, yes, I do think we should encourage and support more risk-taking generally. We often have a bit of a fear of failure, not just in the third sector, but across the economy and across society. And dare I say it, our media sometimes encourages that because, they jump on anything that maybe doesn't work out. But we live lives where if you don't try things, sometimes you're never going to achieve anything. So yes, I believe more, not irresponsible risk-taking, but more considered risk-taking to try to achieve great things is something we should encourage. I spoke earlier about the Community Jobs Scotland scheme, which very deliberately focuses on young people furthest away from the labour market, including those who have criminal convictions, because we shouldn't write off anybody in our society. We should try to work with people to allow them to overcome challenges and to make the most of themselves. And if you're not prepared to take a bit of risk in doing that, then you won't achieve as much as you might otherwise do. And lastly, in terms of the third question, yes, I do recognise that it's not the ideal way of funding the third sector to have short-term, year-on-year funding where there is a lot of effort spent on the part of individual organisations on what must seem like an almost constant basis into funding applications that takes that effort away from the frontline service delivery. We're trying, within our budgeting, to move towards an approach that is based on 3-year funding where we can. We have, and this is not me trying to make excuses or pass the buck here, but we do have a chain of funding in Scotland. So the Scottish Government is dependent on decisions taken by the UK Government for our funding. Local authorities are dependent on decisions the Scottish Government takes for their funding. Many third sector organisations are dependent on decisions. So that and you can't isolate one bit of that chain. Often the constraint we're working under is not having that long-term certainty from the UK Government. I mean, a good example of that is we will hopefully, as I said earlier, pass the Scottish Government's budget tomorrow. In a couple of weeks' time, though, the Chancellor will get up in the House of Commons to deliver the UK Government's budget. And I just have to sit and cross my fingers and hope that that budget doesn't come up with any surprises that then impacts on our funding. So it's not even just a case of 1 year versus 3 years. It can often be, and there have been UK budgets in the past few years that have delivered in-year changes to the Scottish Government's budget. So that's, as I say, it's not trying to make excuses, it's just trying to explain the chain of funding that often makes it difficult for us to do what I accept would be a better way of doing it and what you know would be a better way of doing it. We are trying to do that where we can. So in equalities funding, for example, we've already signalled the move to 3-year funding, and we will try to do that as much as possible. I think there are other things that collectively we can talk about how, David talked rightly about collaboration, about how the third sector works better together and how we work better with the third sector to get a much more rational approach and more stable approach to funding that takes some of what feels like unproductive burdens off of your shoulders. I think it's an important issue that we don't yet have absolutely right, but I think by working together we can make further improvements.
Thank you, First Minister. David, in terms of what's the biggest risk we could take in employability, what could we do differently that's going to be maybe more of a game changer?
In terms of the second question, I mean, it's only right, going back to human rights, just because you've maybe committed a crime or you've had a challenge in life to a certain point, you shouldn't be allowed to get a job, or you should have struggled to have a normal life and have a job. I think that's wrong, you know, and I think it would be great if we could get some policy in place where private sector businesses as well as third sector businesses can give people jobs and give people the training that they need. I think there's been a lot of, you've seen Virgin Trains recently put a release out about the fact that they're going to start taking X amount of ex-offenders. On one hand, that's great because ex-offenders are getting jobs, but on the other hand, it's adding to the stigma by putting that out as an announcement saying, oh, we're going to take on 100 convicts. We need to start seeing people as people, regardless of their background or their history. Personally, I think at street soccer, for example, 60% of your staff team have came through homelessness or addiction and so on. And often that means with addiction comes petty crime and so on. But we look past that because we look at the value in people. We see people as people and look at the opportunity that we can get to work with these guys and lasses. And I think we need to do more to encourage every organisation to kind of strip away that kind of prejudgment about somebody's past life and just see them for their skills, their talent and their potential.
Okay. Colin, in terms of the point around Brexit, obviously you touched on human rights and that's a key issue, it's a major concern for the sector. I mean, what are your kind of fears and maybe hopes in terms of how this might go?
Part of my fears around it is what I said earlier about the kind of narrative that we're hearing, pitting communities against each other, a hierarchy of who is deserving of you know, being part of the country or being in the country. And with that then comes more pernicious, slightly more embedded discrimination possibly, so within organisations or within communities. Because if you've got somebody who's talking about quite strong views maybe about immigration, there are chances are they're going to have strong views about disability or they're going to have strong views about LGBT equality. And I think it's about trying to take some back control of the benefits that people bring to society and the values of which we hold dear as a society and as a country. And trying to maintain that as part of a positive narrative. Brexit is going to happen, you know, probably. We have to think about what that means. But I think what that also means is not taking our eye off the ball about what actually matters values-wise to us as communities and really amplifying that and shouting about that and making sure that in all our organisations, across the public sector, in the private sector, in our schools, that those values are absolutely central to how we go forward.
Thank you. Colleagues, there's a lady here. Anybody else? The gentleman at the front and the lady up at the back there.
Thank you. I'm Nicola Hansen. I'm the manager of Roar Connections for Life. I welcome the commitment that you've made to acknowledging the third sector's role in health and social care and the future with the ageing demographics. I welcome and agree with the fact that we need to be not just talking about working in partnership, but truly working in partnership. Unfortunately, what we've witnessed is that some of the structures, we are innovative and nimble because we're able to see things from a completely different perspective. We've won some national awards on the service designs, and we see a gap between health and social care's role in falls prevention and community safety's falls prevention role. There's a big gap that we could really do something about. But because there isn't actually mechanisms to join those silos together in a meaningful way that doesn't challenge the status quo, it can be really difficult to have those conversations. We've developed a whole systems approach to avoiding that first fall. We could roll something out. So my question is, you know, could there be a commitment to tackle some of these challenges with new partnerships and joining some of the dots that haven't maybe been joined yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the lady up the back and then the gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Laura van der Hoeven from Families Outside, and we work with families affected by imprisonment, including about 27,000 children a year who have experienced their parents' imprisonment. The First Minister's made a lot of the attainment gap and her commitment to addressing that in the education system. Significant money is getting put into the education system to help to support those goals. And I just wondered what role she saw for services which support families with a parent in prison and other children in adverse circumstances in support in reducing that gap.
Okay, gentleman now.
Hello, I'm Michael Dunlop from Wheelchairs for Ukraine. I would like to see if you could ring fence some of your money for disabled people, for training them, for working here in Britain or in Scotland. On the subject of Brexit, we are involved in advising the city councils in Ukraine on disability access and being dragged out of Europe. We're trying to get them up to European standards. It just seems weird. But my question is about ring fencing some money for disabled training. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. First Minister.
Nicola, your point about joining the dots is fundamental. Health and social care integration in itself was about filling the gaps between the health service and social care delivered by local authorities and joining that up so that it's the person that matters, not how the services are, service delivery is structured. So that in itself is about that. But you're absolutely right to say it can't end there, because it's not just the health service and local authority social care services that deliver the holistic service that will allow us to meet our objectives here. That involves working with other statutory agencies, but also crucially involves working with the third sector. So I think you've made the point, and you know, I'll go away and have a look at the particular example you've used around falls prevention. But I think you've very powerfully made the point that this is still a journey we're on. And it underlines the point I've made and have made consistently since we first started down the health and social care integration path, is that the third sector must be central to this. Because very often, and I've seen this with my own eyes on countless occasions, it's the third sector, much more than the statutory sector, that will have the innovative, very person-centred ways of approaching things that the statutory sector just don't have. And going back to the brief chat I was having with Martin earlier on as well, is that, you know, if we're going to deal with the demands on social care because of the ageing population, we can't just do what we're doing now in exactly the same ways, or we won't effectively meet that demand. We've got to change our thinking around how we do things, and you know, prevention, not just of falls, but prevention of hospitalisation, of people going into care homes prematurely. That's going to involve a truly collaborative, much more asset-based approach, drawing on all of the assets in a community. And again, the third sector is crucial to that. So I think I couldn't agree more with the need to continue that journey of bringing it all together in a holistic way. Laura, your point about children who've got parents in prison, I think is a really important one. The attainment challenge and the attainment fund, which is part of what it's doing, is giving head teachers more resource to focus on the things that often will be very specific to their particular cohort of children that will raise attainment. So, that should absolutely include children whose particular challenges are around the fact that they may have a parent in prison. So the attainment, I think it's really important. I would encourage you to see the attainment challenge and fund in a broadest sense here. It's equipping head teachers with the resources they need, not just to tackle the thing that happens in the classroom, but to bring resource to bear to tackle some of the things that happen to children outside the classroom but affect how they do in the classroom. And I think, again, I'll take away the specific issue around children with parents in prison to make sure we've got that thinking fully embedded. I was actually having a conversation with somebody last night who'd been to visit Shotts Prison and was telling me about something which I must go and see for myself, a parenting programme that they're doing in Shotts Prison just now, encouraging particularly longer term prisoners to still understand and see and develop their role as parents. So I think the work we do in prisons and the work you support in prisons is really important in that regard as well. But it's, you know, it's a useful way of just reminding us that the attainment challenge that we face, while it, you know, the hard edge of that is in the classroom, we won't tackle it just by focusing on what kids do in the classroom. It's much bigger and wider than that. And lastly, Michael, I agree with your point about Brexit, but on the issue of disabled ring fencing money to support disabled people with disabilities into employment, I do endorse that approach. So the Community Jobs Scotland scheme that I've just talked about is deliberately focusing on, as I say, younger people furthest away from the labour market, including younger people that have disabilities. So making sure that we have the ability where it's necessary and appropriate to target funding on particular groups is a really important part of an agenda that is truly inclusive.
Amy, in terms of the preventive agenda, in terms of health and social care integration, yeah, you could talk about structures all day, but actually, what is it that we need to do in that space that will join up the silos and make a difference and take the prevention agenda further forward? Easy question.
I'm aware. I'm really aware of Nicola's work in that project, and I know that they've hooked up with Alzheimer Scotland, because you know, kind of joining up the cognitive and the physical is really important. And I was delighted to hear our First Minister talk about the preventative approaches. For us, health and social care integration has so far, and I think this will resonate with quite a few of my colleagues in the sector in the room, been quite structurally focused. And that's because you're trying to merge some very big structures. So we understand why that is. And you talked about a journey. But we really need to start thinking more about integration as an approach and about this person-centeredness. We're not seeing that yet. And yes, the third sector can work with the statutory sector, absolutely, in partnership to do that. It's not just about working with the third sector, though. It's beyond that. I'll use an example. There's been a bit of media recently, a few weeks ago, that you might have seen about post-diagnostic support for people with dementia. And the approach that Alzheimer Scotland came up with, the Scottish Government has said, right, this is what you need to do since 2013. And credit to our current First Minister, it was when she was Cabinet Secretary for Health that she made dementia a national priority. But post-diagnostic support is about these 5 pillars. It's about coming to terms with your illness. It's about planning for your future care. It's about planning for your future decision-making, which, as you can imagine, is important with a condition that's about progressive cognitive decline. It's about peer support, and it's about your connections with your community. So those things I referred to in my opening remarks about keeping your family, your community connections, your activities, your job if you're still in a job. None of those, not one of those things is a health intervention. Yet this was delivered by the health boards, okay? And I think one of the problems we're seeing in delivering this intervention is that there's still a lack of understanding sometimes amongst some health professionals. Some of them get it, some of them are brilliant, but amongst some managers about, well, why are we doing this? When people don't have an obvious health need, why are we investing in this particular intervention that isn't doing anything clinical? And it's about that approach. When everybody running our health services and making those investment decisions understands why we need to be investing in these community, non-clinical approaches to prevent inappropriate hospital admissions, to prevent falls, to prevent admissions into residential care, then we'll know that we have an integrated health and social care system, integrated together and integrated with our communities.
Okay, thank you, Amy. Colleagues? Obviously struck a chord. Any more questions, colleagues? There's the gentleman up there, the lady in the middle, and Jenny, start with the gentleman at the back there, just beside you, and then move down.
My name's Ian Logan. I work for a community trust in East Ayrshire, and like many small villages around Ayrshire and around Scotland, in fact, they've saw, over the years, there's been less money. They feel the squeeze, and the facilities get taken away because the local government get their money reduced. My question is around kind of what David said about the private sector. There seems to be money somewhere, but I don't know if it's getting filtered down to that level. Is there anything that the Scottish Government and the private sector can do to try and get some of that money somewhere back into the smaller communities?
Hi, my name is Kate Kilpatrick. I'm a consultant and I work with international development humanitarian organisations. My question relates to the media, which a number of you have mentioned this morning. I think it's clear that in the UK broadly we're facing a situation where we've got an increasingly toxic media. We see that it was crystallised obviously through the Brexit campaign and the fallout, but also in relation to migrants, refugees, and my own sector of humanitarian work. So my question really is, this affects many of us working in the voluntary and third sector, dealing with public perceptions. Is there anything more that government and policy can do to tackle this issue of toxic media and kind of regressive media statements? And if not, what should we as a sector be doing about it? Thanks.
Saving that one for Colin. Once we'll come back to that, Colin.
Hi, Graham Fitzsimmons from Cornerstone Community Care. A comment and a question really. I think, firstly, David, your passion about collaboration I think really resonates with me, and anybody in the room that knows me would recognise that I'm equally as passionate. I think it's the answer to so many challenges, not just in social care but the third sector generally. One of the biggest challenges we have in care is recruitment and retention of good people who want to do it because it's what they're passionate about rather than just for the sake of having a job. The living wage is obviously something that's been done to tackle that, and I think risk-taking is really important as well in recruitment for social care. There doesn't seem to be a great awareness within local authorities in terms of the challenges that care providers have recruiting and retaining the best people. I'm just wondering what levels what discussions are taken within the government to actually not just address it, but be proactive with third sector providers to tackle that and make a change. Because if we don't do that now, we won't even be close to the challenges that we're talking about in 2035 for the ageing demographics. Thank you.
First Minister, do you want to kick off? I want to come to Colin on the kind of toxic media, and okay. David and Amy as well. I'll come back.
In terms of the first question, sorry, I didn't catch your name from East Ayrshire, but I think we should challenge the private sector to do more. We have what we call the business pledge in Scotland, where we encourage businesses to sign up to being progressive employers, paying the living wage, looking at how they can, benefit their workforce and from that benefit the communities that they live in. But I think there's more we can do. No business exists in isolation. Every business depends on the community they are part of for their customers and their revenues and their profits, and there has to be a kind of two-way approach to that. So, companies have a vested interest in investing in the communities that they're embedded in. So I do think, while we shouldn't and don't expect the private sector to pick up the obligations that are rightly obligations of government, national and local, when we talk about collaboration and we talk about working together, we shouldn't exclude the private sector from that, because good private sector businesses will want to be part of that, whether that's in terms of employability, whether it's in terms of community regeneration. The good ones will recognise the importance of doing that. So I think there possibly is a role for government to just encourage that even more. Graham, you point around, I think those discussions have to take place at all levels and are to some extent taking place at all levels. So if you take the living wage, for example, for social care workers that you mentioned, part of the driver for adopting that policy so firmly was not just because it's the right thing to do, but because we recognise that paying the living wage is part of the answer to the recruitment and retention challenges that many care providers are experiencing right now. But I think there is, and again it goes back, I keep mentioned the brief conversation I had with Martin earlier on. It comes back to these discussions are important for the short and medium term, but I think there's a bigger discussion that all of us need to be having about how we do things in the longer term, how we start now to think about how we're providing services and whether that's fit for purpose, whether we're absolutely harnessing all of the assets and attributes we've got. And I like to think those discussions are active at local level, they're certainly active at national level, but we as government have got a role to play in making sure that those discussions are happening. I know you're going past to Colin on the I should stress for any journalists in the room, the term toxic media is not mine. I'm just quoting it from Kate. I'm not going to go in a diatribe against the media, mainly because if I started, I probably wouldn't stop. But we've got a free media in this country, and it's a hallmark of any democracy. And I, as a politician, shouldn't like everything I read in the media, because when I don't like it, that means the media is doing its job. And we've got some media outlets that I think perform that role of scrutinising government, holding power to account better than others. But that's just in the nature of a free and diverse media. But your question, and this is the bit I'll address, your question is, can politicians and policymakers do more to try to tackle what is certainly a toxic narrative around some issues in this country? And the answer to that is yes, we can. Because one of the reasons why certain sections of the media can indulge in that narrative around immigration, for example, is that for far too long, if I can be absolutely blunt about it, not so much in Scotland, fair to say, across the political spectrum, but for far too long UK-wide, politicians, supposedly mainstream, respectable, progressive politicians, have pandered to the anti-immigration, anti-migration narrative that is now taken root. So sometimes, we've got a duty, often we've got a duty to stand up and argue the case for things that might not be popular in the pages of the Daily Mail. I feel as if I do things every single day that are not popular in the pages of the Daily Mail, which I'm often quite proud of, I have to say. They did once call me the most dangerous woman in Britain, which is the nicest thing they ever said about me. But politicians sometimes cower in the face of that kind of narrative, when in actual fact, what we should do is stand up to it and challenge it. And we're at a moment in history right now where that obligation to stand up and tackle some of the myths and misconceptions and downright distortions about migrants or whatever other group happens to be getting the treatment is more important now than it's ever been.
Colin, you're at the kind of sharp end of some of this, and you have been for a long time, and it's probably got worse rather than better, particularly Daily Mail style. But
yeah,
what do we think we need to do to tackle some of that as a sector?
Well, I echo a lot what the First Minister just said there as well. We do face it quite a lot in terms of the work that we do. And one of the areas where it really seems to kick things off is in our work in schools, for example. So we know that 99% of young LGBT people hear some form of homophobic, biphobic or transphobic language in their schools every day. Only 16% of teachers in Scotland have had any training whatsoever about tackling or talking about LGBT issues in the classroom. 1 in 4 of our young people have attempted suicide because of the bullying they're faced in their schools. So we work directly with teachers. We go in and we do teacher training to give them the confidence to be able to tackle those issues. And that then strikes fear into some sections of communities, but also in elements of the media. And I'm going to say exactly what the First Minister said as well. This is not about calling the media toxic. But we do get a lot of pushback from it, and we do get a lot of pushback from it, particularly around the areas of the Daily Mail. And my view about it is, I am not doing my job, and Stonewall is not doing its job, unless it's annoying the Daily Mail on some occasions. Yes, we'd like to bring them with us, but the very fact is this, it's about the dignity of those young people so they can flourish, and they can be who they want to be, and they can go on and live their lives. And that's why we do what we do. The First Minister talked about what can government do, what can politicians do. Well, they can be visible, and they can be role models, and they can be allies, and they can stand out, and they can challenge that kind of language. And they can say, we support this work, and above all else, we're actually going to act actively do something about this, and we're going to do that with our heads held high, and we're going to be proud about that. It's about that visibility. We run a campaign called No Bystanders, hashtag No Bystanders. And that's when you hear it or you see it, and that is discriminatory language of any kind, you call it out. So at school, you tell your teacher. In your work, you tell your boss. But the fact is, it's about standing up and calling it out, and we need more of that. So from an LGBT perspective, we do need more of our politicians to make the case as to why lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people should live their lives equally in society, how our young people should go to school every day not feeling fear or, you know, that gamut of utter terror because they know they're about to be bullied and they can't talk to their teacher. So we need much more visible leadership about that. And I think that's where government, politicians, each and every one of us in this room has a responsibility, is standing up and calling out that kind of negative, scaremongering language that has a real detrimental impact on our young people every day.
Thank you. Colleague, we're just about running out of time. Amy, one point that you've taken from this morning that you would say, right, that's going to make a difference to my thinking as we're going forward? Positivity, collaboration and partnership?
It's just the theme that I've seen, whether it's Colin's answer to that last question, what I was going to say about social care recruitment, what we're saying about health and social care integration, seeing people as people. I think it was yourself that said it, David. We are a sector that's lucky enough to be able to do that, and we need to continue to do that, no matter how big some of our organisations get, no matter how mired in our funding applications we all get. It's about seeing people as people, and that's what we bring, I think, to government and to the statutory sector, is that ability to do that, and we need to keep pushing for that, for structures, for processes, for ways of working that enable us in society to see people, as individuals with a contribution to make.
David, from yourself?
Well, for me, it's, again, just touching on, it's about, there's going to come a time over the next few years where you might feel isolated or as if looking at funding strategies and all that, and you're feeling under pressure. But all you need to do is, I mean, look around the tables today. I mean, I'm really proud to be part of the third sector because we've got the diverse group of talented people in Scotland. So if you're struggling, reach out to your fellow brothers and sisters and say, look, let's do this together, let's work together, because see, at the end of the day, all we want to do is make Scotland a better place, and we can only do it if we do it together.
Thank you, David. Colleagues, before I ask the First Minister to make a few final remarks, I think we need to show our appreciation for Colin, Amy, David and the First Minister. I'm going to give the First Minister the opportunity. She wants to make a few closing remarks and touch on some of the issues.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for the discussion. You know, in terms of what strikes me, which always strikes me during these discussions, are the themes of the need for us to work together. As Amy said, to get beyond structures and to focus on people. I think we should take heart from some of the progress we've made, but use it to motivate us to go further. And, you know, I leave this discussion, as I did the same discussion last year, despite all of the challenges, feeling quite optimistic, because I think David's just very powerfully made this point. You know, all of the assets and the skills and the resources and the expertise that is in this room right now and in the wider third sector, harnessed properly, with all of us playing our part, is capable of overcoming any of the challenges we face. We've just got to make sure we harness it properly. So there's work to do, but there's every reason to feel optimistic about the ability we've got to take on those challenges. So I hope you enjoy the discussions over the next couple of days, and again, just thank you for everything you and your many colleagues out there do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. First Minister. Colleagues, that brings this session to a close. I'll let Sheila say some thanks. Just to let you know that Angela Constance, who MSP, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Equalities, Communities and Social Security, will be making a speech at 11 o'clock in the theatre, and I'm sure she's going to expand on some of the detail that we've been talking about here this morning. So if you're around, that's obviously worth listening to. And on the Brexit point, Mike Russell's speaking tomorrow on that contentious issue, so I'm sure you'll enjoy that as well. Sheila.
Thank you, John. On behalf of you all, I'd like to thank John for chairing that event, Amy David and Colin, but most of all, First Minister, thank you for coming. Yet again, it's been an inspiring opening to this year's gathering, so thank you very much. And I'll see you all later. Could I ask you to remain in your seats just now until the First Minister's away, and then we can get moving. Thank you.